During my pregnancy, my husband had a lively secretary by his side. In the third month of her appearance, he handed me the divorce agreement. Before leaving, he took down our wedding photo. I'm sorry, she was very jealous during her pregnancy and insisted on seeing me personally destroy these. When I left, I heard that he was organizing a second wedding for her, something I had waited 10 years for. I thought they were each other's destined true love. But on the night we reunited, he called me frantically. Choking back tears, he questioned me, "Eva, how could you not tell me that you were ill back then?" 3 years after the divorce, Andrew, who had already remarried, suddenly called me in a frenzy. I didn't mean to ignore the call, the medication had simply made me fall asleep. Waking up in the dim room, I looked at my phone, which displayed dozens of unfamiliar missed calls. I remained silent for a long time, with an unfounded certainty that it was Andrew. Time has passed, and those loves and hates that I thought were eternal or profound have faded away with it. In the end, I still called back, and the phone was almost instantly answered. The first thing I heard was a question, "Eva, why didn't you tell me back then that you were ill?" He sounded very angry, and I couldn't understand why. Why was he always angry with me? He never liked me even before we separated, and now we are even more estranged. What kind of temper is he throwing? I didn't answer, and he suddenly became choked up. "If you had told me back then that it was because of illness that you aborted the child, I wouldn't have." I interrupted Andrew, who was complaining with a sense of grievance. "It's just one child, isn't there someone else who can carry one for you? Besides, the abortion was because I didn't want to be with you, not because of any illness." The unexpected reunion made me start to recall what I was like 3 years ago. A dull housewife, mechanically guarding the kitchen every day. After dinner, Andrew went straight into the study. A strong wave of dizziness hit me, and the dishes I was washing slipped from my hands and shattered all over the floor. Half an hour later, I woke up from my coma. One side of my clothes was soaked with cold water, my hands and feet were icy, and there were broken porcelain pieces beside me. I was still lying in the kitchen, and Andrew was still in the study. Perhaps it was because there had been too many instances of throwing plates and bowls during our arguments. So even though the noise outside was deafening, he remained as still as a mountain. I pushed open the study door, wanting to tell Andrew to take me to the hospital for a prenatal checkup tomorrow. It was a child that the whole family had been looking forward to for 4 years, and it suddenly arrived. But perhaps it was too sudden, causing his father to become anxious and restless. I still remember the frown that suddenly appeared on his brow when I told him the news, the flicker of disdain in his eyes. It was as if he was entangled in some troublesome matter, and without much thought, he simply said, "Get rid of it." I was stunned by his words, and he seemed to realize it too. "Sorry, I misspoke." That night, the balcony was littered with cigarette butts. In the study, Andrew wore headphones, his face soft as he listened to his new capable secretary report on work. Dressed sharply in a suit, he looked composed while I was in such a disheveled state, ultimately choosing not to appear in front of the camera. At that moment, my head felt too heavy, I knew something was off, yet I couldn't grasp a single thought. For years of marriage have dulled all my sharp edges, I do not wish to become a resentful woman filled with suspicion and doubt. Or rather, at that time I simply did not want to take any measures to hold on to anything. 2 months later, in the obstetrics and gynecology department of the hospital, I met that beautiful female secretary. It was our first time meeting in reality. Her name is Isabel, a refined and capable career woman. She smiled when she saw me and eagerly pulled me into a discussion about baby matters. Later, she said they were in an office romance, so it was kept private. She spoke of the beginning of her being unattainable, of his unbearable indifference to her pursuit, and of the thrill and excitement of their secrecy. She said that now with this child, everything is different. She is willing to be brave this time, even if there are some hardships along the way. With a smile, she asked me if this was good, and as a mother, whether I would support her. After a long silence, I nodded. The day after she decided to fight for it, Andrew gave me a divorce agreement. Then, suddenly, his affair with her became the talk of the town, tumultuous and dramatic. I was too exhausted at that time: miscarriage, infidelity, illness, and losing myself in 4 years of marriage. I couldn't wait to escape, I just wanted to survive, with no heart to resist or seek revenge. I followed the doctor's advice and had the child in my womb removed. The child's father did not show joy when he arrived, but upon learning of the departure, he erupted in anger. As a result, we naturally divorced. Later, I was admitted to the hospital, lying on the operating table. I could still hear the grand reports of Andrew marrying Isabel. Andrew ignored my dignity, enduring the scorn to do this. It was to give Isabel a legitimate status. He loved her so much, wanting to support her. He wanted all the past hurts towards Isabel to disappear with my defeat, along with that wedding. 3 years after the divorce, I followed Andrew's wishes and no longer appeared before him. Our separation was not dignified, so I thought that even if we were to meet again, we should act like strangers passing by. Moreover, he was already remarried. But clearly Andrew did not think so. He broke the conventional rules and frequently appeared in my life. My leisure photography suddenly received a lot of publicity and admiration. The owner of the flower shop next door suddenly became friendly, and the bouquets I ordered were always the freshest and most beautiful. The breakfast shop I loved but had long since closed suddenly opened right across from my house. A luxury goods store I hadn't visited in 2 or 3 years suddenly called to say I had won a prize. It's not hard to guess whose handiwork it is, I just can't understand. Isn't he angry, dissatisfied, or resentful? Why bother doing all this? Once again, during a follow-up visit to the hospital, the person who had been hiding for so long finally showed up. Seeing the needle marks on the back of my hand, he suddenly turned red-eyed. Helpless, anxious, pained, and pale. He handed over a business card. "This is a specialist in treating leukemia, he." Andrew's tone was difficult. After adjusting his breath, he spoke again. "He is very capable. Come with me, Eva, I will definitely cure you." I frowned in confusion. "Why are you doing this? Do you think I would have a miserable life after leaving you? Do you pity me?" Indeed, a billionaire CEO, a man with a happy family. Suddenly encountering his lonely ex-wife, he finds himself in a dire situation with a serious illness. He shook his head in panic. "No." Perhaps knowing that I have little patience for him now, he spoke rapidly. And about the time Isabel was cyberbullied, I also realized it had nothing to do with you, it was all her self-directed drama. "I wronged you, I'm sorry." I paused for a moment before recalling what he had said. His voice was tense, making it hard for him to speak about what happened back then. "I want to make it up to you." I laughed. Indeed, he still sees me as pitiful, so destitute. After all, I had told him about the online harassment long ago, but he didn't believe me. The only difference between then and today is that he thinks the miscarriage was related to illness, not out of jealousy or spite. He wants to make it up to me, or perhaps he still feels a bit of guilt and unease in his heart. After all, that year, while I endured the hardships of pregnancy, he was entwined with another woman by her bedside. I wander in the empty room, while he revels in the bright lights and wine. I lost my child due to illness and was forced to divorce, while he grandly welcomed a new wife and had new children. Everything seems deeply lamentable. Those past wounds, he indeed was not unaware of. Rather, he knew and chose to inflict harm to the end. Now to show a little kindness is rather too late. My hopes for these things died in the past, and my wishes for his disgrace have also perished in reality. 6 years of love, 4 years of marriage. A full 10 years, if one must distinguish right from wrong with him, it would only waste more time on the person in front of me. Rather than this, it would be better to do as we said when we divorced back then. A clean break, never to meet again. Throw everything away, good or bad. I won't spend a second thinking of him, every second no longer concerns him, that is the best for me. I pushed the business card back to him and calmly told him, "I have a very good doctor, and I have found a matching bone marrow. Soon I will have surgery and fully recover my health. I don't need your compensation either." When we divorced, you gave me a sum of material compensation that allowed me to live and treat my illness in peace. Andrew shook his head in disagreement. How can it be counted like that? How can he not even feel resentment? He retorted with reluctance, what does that even count for? Those things that are considered good compensation are nothing compared to that. You really don't need to feel guilty. Terminating the pregnancy has nothing to do with my illness, so your reason for insisting on the divorce back then still holds strong. I sincerely hope that Andrew will keep his promise like I did and withdraw from each other's lives. His approach was an intrusion, making me resist. I was even afraid that in some moment of my future life, he would still be there. But he clearly did not believe that. To make him give up, I spoke the truth. Andrew, my life has been getting better since I left you, and I really like it. Please continue to maintain our state of not disturbing each other. My words seemed to hurt him deeply. As I turned to leave, I could still feel Andrew's intense loneliness, unwillingness, and attachment. But I did not look back. I don't understand how just because of an unknown misunderstanding, Andrew could have such a big change. It felt as if he really cared about me. Back then, Andrew was incredibly angry when he found out I had an abortion and divorced me. Looking back, it's hard not to think there was some acting involved. After all, when he learned about that child, he never showed me a kind face. If he didn't love me, how could he possibly feel reluctant? His entire attitude towards the child was, in essence, his attitude towards me. Everything is not without reason, the gradually silent WeChat messages and his increasingly impatient tone. Even before I got pregnant, his indifference was evident. I just couldn't let go at that time, so I didn't dare to admit that the one who accompanied me from youth to maturity truly no longer loved me. Later, I became pregnant, and I foolishly thought that the child would ease our relationship. But the truth is, the child only accelerated the demise of this relationship. He grew tired of my blandness. The timely appearance of the lively and vibrant Isabel, however, reignited his feelings. Andrew is a strict person, but he unconsciously indulges Isabel. His assistant, who had been with him for a year, was demoted for being late once due to a car accident. When Isabel was late to meet a client, he merely said it was due to circumstances and that it wouldn't happen again. Yet when the next time came, he once again brushed it off lightly. Andrew is nothing like the humble and polite person people say he is. Instead, he is hypocritical and cold-hearted. He is indifferent and ruthless towards those he does not care about. Others praise him for being aloof towards women and for being clear-cut in his personal and professional life, envying my good fortune. Yet, I gradually began to notice the lipstick appearing in his pocket and the foundation smudged on his suit. When he unconsciously mentioned Isabel again, accompanied by a joy he himself was unaware of, I erupted with an unprecedented sense of grievance, leading to repeated arguments and countless pleas for them to keep their distance. All I received in return was Andrew's indifference, a cold stare in response. His rationality made me seem like a madwoman, driving me to madness and then blaming me for it. Only when my bitterness was directed at Isabel did he show any rare signs of disturbance. Pointing at my nose and scolding me, a narrow-minded madwoman, he slammed the door and left. As if to prove his own innocence, he became even more reckless in his interactions with Isabel. Whether it was the intoxicating nights or the dazzling world of fame, he always brought her along. The first night he didn't come home was on my birthday. The way he hurriedly pushed the door open, and the slightly evasive look in his eyes when he saw me, mixed with the scent of clothes, alcohol, and perfume. That was the most important turning point between them. More and more busy excuses, more and more meetings. Eventually, I got tired of arguing, and he got tired of it too. Andrew completely ignored my pain and resolutely stepped into the depths of turmoil with Isabel. At that time, it had only been a little over 2 months since Isabel joined the company and they first met. Yet at the same time, another woman is also emerging from a decade of trials and warmth. She chooses to embrace life in the face of death and decides to let go. So from that moment on, she could no longer give birth to that child. As for the sudden illness, it is true that, from beginning to end, it had no connection. In the early days of youth, Andrew was voted the most handsome by our classmates. Meanwhile, I was among the top 10 in the class, wearing black glasses and sporting thick bangs. I thought I was the only one witnessing the youthful vigor of that boy. But it wasn't until I got to college and faced Andrew that I realized he had also witnessed my enduring spirit. He generously praised, "You look much better than with bangs." He said with great enthusiasm, "Every time I see you on the award stage, I feel both excited and proud. You are simply my idol. Every time I hear you speak, I feel a surge of passion. I can't believe I actually ended up at the same university as you." As the sun set, we were about to part ways. He pinched his reddened earlobe and hesitantly asked, "The grilled fish restaurant at the school gate is really good, have you tried it?" It's completely understandable to fall for Andrew back then. There was no grand romance, just a love as plain as water that nourished the uncharted dryness in my heart. We studied together, prepared for exams, and were teased by friends, sharing both good and bad times. Later, he accompanied me through the pain of losing my family, and I gave up a high salary to walk the unpromising path of entrepreneurship with him. At first, we were really poor, crammed into a small rental apartment of just over 10 square meters. Even though we were exhausted, we laughed like big dogs and little dogs, filling the room with joy. 2 years after graduation, Andrew earned his first pot of gold. On our 6th anniversary of being in love, he proposed to me. I tearfully accepted, unaware that happiness had already begun its countdown. Looking back now, 6 years is indeed too long. Long enough that my heart had actually grown tired, but I couldn't avoid taking responsibility. Not marrying me is the seed of a sinner, which has since been planted in his heart. After marrying me, the sinner became a bound man. He could only endure. For years later, his temperament grew increasingly indifferent. Endurance gradually consumed love. During my pregnancy, endurance broke through its threshold. He was filled with restlessness, with no one to understand. Isabel, who appeared like fate, seemed to steadily catch his emotions. Long after the marriage, I withdrew from company management. I became the traditionally excellent virtuous wife and mother. The first time I saw Isabel was in the photos on the company's public account. There were a total of 7 photos of Andrew, 5 of which featured Isabel. After asking my former colleagues, I learned that he was an intern who had joined half a month ago. But which ordinary intern could stand in the position next to him? I stared at the last photo for a long time. Andrew was turned slightly, protecting Isabel behind him, raising his glass to toast the partners across from him. A barely perceptible gesture of protection. At that time, I was tormented by pregnancy symptoms and didn't think about it at all. Now, where did the cold-hearted Andrew find this kind of kindness? I don't know exactly when Andrew started to have feelings for Isabel. But I know that he is destined to be entangled with Isabel for life, and it was on my birthday that this began. He recognized himself, ultimately choosing Isabel in a situation of 2 options. On the 3rd day he decided to return to his family. It was the 2nd month since Isabel joined the company. Andrew's emotions were adrift, but morality pulled him back. I was also torn, a pregnant housewife contemplating divorce. The other party was still wealthy, handsome, responsible, and even a man who had not actually cheated. No one could understand, cursing him for not knowing the blessings he had. I was also confused. I had had enough of his emotional abuse. Subconsciously, I hoped something would change the situation, whether good or bad. After our last argument, Andrew hasn't come home for a week. I took the initiative to call him. Over the years, except for the year I started my business, I missed one birthday due to working overtime, and we have always celebrated together. I want to tell him that we should celebrate together one last time, and then go our separate ways in the future. When the call connected, the first thing I heard was a woman's laughter. Then he asked casually, "What's up?" I unconsciously tried to please him. "I made your favorite dish, can you come home early? Today is my..." "I know, there's work. Goodbye." After a long time, I buried myself in my arm and wondered what kind of work could make someone so happy. Buying vegetables, chopping them, stir-frying, a mechanical repetition, just like any other day. It wasn't until 2 in the morning that I realized my birthday had passed, and he would not be coming back. I haphazardly tore open the cake, lit a candle by myself, and made a wish. This year's wish did not include hoping we would always be together. Happy birthday to me. I still remember that year's cake was salty. Andrew came in at 5 in the morning and was taken aback when he saw me sitting alone in the living room. Then he pretended to be natural, turning on the light, changing his shoes, and hanging up his coat. You didn't come back last night. So what? Yesterday was my birthday. The voice behind me stopped, as if finally noticing the cake on the table, recalling the words I had left unspoken when I was interrupted on the phone. After a long silence, Andrew leaned in and held me close. I'm sorry, I had a sudden engagement last night, but I didn't forget your birthday. He took out a beautiful necklace from his embrace, your birthday gift. Do you like it? Looking at my tired, pale face and the gradually growing belly, guilt flashed in his eyes. I shook my head and spoke indifferently, Andrew, we. But he didn't wait for me to finish, tightening his embrace and seriously saying, Eva, let's live well from now on. I will take good care of you and the baby. Much later, I learned that he had originally planned to compromise that day. If the events that followed hadn't happened. In the next 2 days, Andrew was so good that it made me vaguely recall him from college. He came home early, cooked for me, gave me massages, and felt the baby in my belly. Everything seemed extremely warm and cozy. But my heart did not find comfort, instead, it grew even colder. I could never forget the scent of rose perfume I smelled in his arms that night. I was afraid of his seemingly compensatory kindness. By the 3rd day, Andrew's massage techniques had become much more skilled than 2 days ago. Then the phone rang, and I followed his gaze. It was that person, his secretary. His expression showed no signs of weakness, but his slightly stiff fingers betrayed him. Not going to answer? It's after work hours, no need to answer. The call hung up and then popped up again. I could feel Andrew becoming increasingly restless, glancing anxiously at his phone. Answer it. I made the decision for him. After hesitating for just a second, Andrew chose to pick up. In the next moment, his expression changed dramatically, and he rushed out the door like the wind. Andrew was out of contact for a whole day. The calls I made went from unanswered to being hung up on directly. Until the next day, he pushed open the bedroom door with a sullen face. Why are you doing this? Andrew questioned me angrily, his voice raised. I don't understand how someone who promised to treat me well could suddenly change their attitude in just 1 day. You're still pretending. He threw his phone at me with force, hitting me right in the lower abdomen. The trending topic on Weibo was eye-catching. The female secretary seduces the married boss. The chat records clearly documented Isabel's bold pursuit of love and Andrew's gradual change of heart. Only the male party's personal information has been completely concealed. Andrew, good night. I had a beautiful dream last night because I dreamt of Andrew. Today I saw a proud little cat, which reminded me of you. So boring. Andrew, I am willing to listen to all your pain, you mustn't be sad by yourself next time. The two gradually became more intimate and ambiguous in their conversations, breaking boundaries. In reality, they started having meals together and going out to play. Their words and actions resembled those of a couple. The time came on the night of my birthday. In a blurry photo that was clearly taken secretly, the two of them walked into the hotel, nestled together. The next day at around 4 o'clock, Andrew hurriedly left the hotel. Andrew, I am willing to follow you, without you being responsible. Are you busy? Why are you ignoring me? Don't use your money to humiliate me, I don't care for it. Why did you fire me? I'm begging you, I promise I won't let her know. The female secretary goes to great lengths to rise in rank, and netizens deduce from one she that it is a married man. Isabel was scolded mercilessly. Even some friends and colleagues anonymously came forward to confirm. Some said they were indeed ambiguous, while others claimed Isabel has been flirting with men and being a mistress since high school. truth and lies, Isabel will not have a good life regardless. The evidence is conclusive, do you still want to argue? He presented the evidence with unwavering certainty. During this time, only you had access to my phone. I had never seen Andrew's eyes so cold and piercing. Not to mention that I only clearly saw their sordidness today. Even knowing this, after 4 years of grinding, I am already weary of revenge and entanglement. I did not do these things. He suddenly swept the cosmetics off my vanity and roared. Stop pretending. Eva, do you know that you have ruined Isabel like this? She is so bullied online that she doesn't even dare to go out. You should know from looking at your phone that I have already drawn a line with her. Why? Why do you still have to do these malicious things? After 10 years, I thought that even if Andrew no longer loved me, he should at least rationally acknowledge my values and character. But he pointed at my nose and insisted that I was malicious. This argument, which seemed like a quarrel, was actually just as one-sided accusations and blame. Looking at his twisted face, I only felt cold and powerless. In the past, when I argued with him, I always hoped it would lead to a good outcome. I had hope for him, believing that 10 years were precious and I couldn't bear to let it all go to waste. But today, I found that I really can't argue anymore. Eva, you have disappointed me too much. Andrew, let's get a divorce. The two voices overlapped. Andrew rarely had a meal, then let out a scoff. Do you think a divorce can threaten me? I replied in a very calm tone, I'm not threatening you. He looked down on me even more, glancing dismissively at my belly. What right do you have to divorce me? How long have you been out of society? Besides being a housewife who begs for money, what else can you do? Moreover, you are still carrying my child. Do you think anyone outside would want you after leaving me? Do you think you are still very young? Andrew mercilessly wounded me, expressing his true feelings about me. Those words of contempt that came out of my mouth made the atmosphere between us tense. In the end, I was the first to speak despite the pain. So you also think that paying for you is a cheap act? I looked at his familiar yet unfamiliar brows and eyes. You really hate me, don't you, Andrew? Actually, I hate you too. If I could do it all over again, I would never want to know you. Andrew remained unmoved, his brows lowered, and the aura around him was still very cold. The wedding photo hanging on the wall suddenly crashed to the ground with a bang, shattering the glass everywhere. Andrew looked up and saw the smiling me in the wedding photo, and he smiled. Eva, when you do something wrong, you should be punished, not evade it. I'm giving you a chance to apologize to Isabel in person. I shook my head indifferently, and Andrew was completely disappointed. Fine, I will compensate her in my own way. He turned to leave, but I suddenly called out to him. I thought he wouldn't stop, but he did. When he turned back, his expression seemed a bit better than before, though it was probably just my illusion. Afraid he would lose patience, I quickly spoke up, Andrew, I know you like Isabel, so be with her. I really don't want to be with you anymore, I'll get rid of the child, just let me go, let's get a divorce. Andrew's fists were tightly clenched, seemingly furious at my unreasonable antics. The door was slammed with a deafening sound, leaving only one phrase in the air, if you want to fight, go ahead. Soon I learned what Andrew meant by his way of compensating her. Isabel transformed from a despised mistress into an independent woman in the workplace, becoming a power couple with Andrew. This strong couple was fervently supported by netizens. As for that mysterious woman, the male party admitted that she was just an ex-girlfriend from a breakup. Isabel's Weibo was filled with many compliments and envious comments. They called her beautiful sister and asked her how she managed to land the CEO. Isabel was not shy about sharing her sweet daily moments with Andrew in the comments to show off their love. Thanks to Andrew for the house he gave me, but I can afford it myself, HM. He even washes my dirty dresses by hand, a love-struck CEO is nothing more than that. She advocated to her fans, sisters, if you want something, you must go all out for it, remember, true love is invincible. Andrew accepted all of this, compensating for everything Isabel had endured. As for his choice not to reveal his name, it wasn't to spare me any embarrassment. It is because he can be a virtual pet girlfriend Andrew, but cannot be the real, verifiable Andrew. The risk of exposure increases, and the consequences are something he cannot bear. For matters like this, I do not intend to stop it either. We're almost divorced, and I have no intention of meddling. In fact, I even enjoy seeing Isabel post things, at least it helps me with the divorce and asset division. Because I was surprised to find that Andrew actually resisted divorcing me. On one hand, his romantic relationship with Isabel is being talked about everywhere. On the other hand, Andrew took many days to reply to me. It's not the news about the divorce negotiations I sent recently. It's about the question I asked him a long time ago, whether we could go to Ireland this year. Stop messing around. Once this busy period is over, I'll take you. And I'll make up for the wedding we never had. Yes, we never had a wedding. When we had time, we didn't have money, when we had money, we didn't have time. For the past 2 years, I kept asking, and he always said he was busy. Later, I stopped asking and just wanted to know if he could accompany me once. Now, I don't think about anything anymore, just a bit of heartache remains. You see, he clearly knows what you want, he knows it very well. When Andrew said he would be busy for a while, it was naturally about Isabel. And in the end, the one he took to Ireland was also Isabel. What I hadn't obtained for a full 10 years, she achieved in just 3 months. In the Holy Church, Isabel wore a wedding dress, like a proud and beautiful swan. She walked step by step towards Andrew, and I clearly saw the deep affection and amazement in his eyes. 2 faces radiating happiness, making vows in the presence of the pastor, exchanging rings, and embracing each other. My heart was dead silent. I never expected Andrew could go this far. I once thought he wouldn't even show up. The idea of putting the company at risk seemed so ridiculous. It seems he truly loves her to the point of disregarding everything. Miss, with your current physical condition, you cannot have this child. The doctor's words jolted me back to reality. For the past few months, I have felt my body deteriorating severely, and I thought it was due to pregnancy. It wasn't until I received the medical report that I realized I had leukemia. I sincerely said, "Doctor, please help me arrange the surgery." I never intended to keep him. We, who once loved each other, would never have imagined this day would come. He married someone else in the place where I wanted to marry him, and I terminated our child. On the divergent paths we walked, we grew further apart, both heartless enough. When I woke up again, I instinctively reached to touch my belly, only to find it had already flattened. After wiping away the tear that had fallen unknowingly, I decided to move forward. A few days later, when I was preparing to be discharged, a strange yet familiar scent of roses wafted in, and I met Isabel. After that video, I unfollowed Isabel and decided to spend every second of my future on myself. That day, I thought I would never see that face again for the rest of my life. After all, this woman had turned my life upside down. Yet, Andrew protected her so well that she never had to face me. Winning this confrontation without a fight, she easily and cleanly got to be with him. She probably didn't recognize me. Seeing my pale face, she took the initiative to help me sit down. "Are you okay?" she asked with concern. I nodded, my attention on the form in her hand. It looked familiar. I had held many of them over the past few months. It was the hospital's pregnancy checkup form. Isabel followed her gaze and smiled shyly. "It's been exactly a month." She touched her barely noticeable belly, feeling uneasy, causing her and the baby's father to fly back from abroad overnight. I didn't say anything, she spoke to herself. The father of my baby and I had an office romance, and we are both workaholics. I just wouldn't agree to go public with him. Although it was thrilling to have a secret relationship, it was quite exciting. After learning about the baby's existence, he was so happy it was almost unbelievable. He took time off work to take care of me, bought a lot of baby supplies, and learned how to be a new dad. He insisted on getting a formal title for our relationship because we hadn't registered our marriage yet due to some issues. He then took me abroad to have a wedding, saying it was the most important moment for a woman and that there had to be a sense of ceremony, so I wouldn't be shortchanged. Actually, it's great as it is. I have an independent career, my own child, and the child's father loves me. It's much better than being a housewife with nothing at all. I look down on them the most. She looked so happy that I couldn't help but ask, don't you really want to be legitimate? Isabel pursed her lips and innocently inquired, actually, becoming a mother gives me courage. I am willing to solve that problem with the baby's father. As a mother too, sister, will you support me? I was taken aback and honestly replied, I will. She suddenly became cheerful and pointed behind me, the baby's father is here. I turned my head and saw Andrew walking quickly towards us, his face showing concern, perhaps worried that I would hurt his precious ones. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel grateful again that I hadn't brought my child into this world, to let him suffer the injustice of watching his father show favoritism. I got up to leave, and Isabel spoke up, thank you, sister, for your support today. I will definitely work hard to overcome all difficulties. She looked proud, her eyes filled with a provocative determination. I pressed the elevator button, my back to her, my voice very faint. There are many famous hospitals in Ireland, why go back to a small hospital in the country for treatment? The elevator door slowly closed, and I turned to gaze into her eyes. What are you pretending, Miss Isabel? After many days, I returned to the home I shared with Andrew. At this moment, it was empty because I had already moved my things out. Not long after, Andrew returned as well. His expression was cold, and he straightforwardly handed me the divorce agreement. He looked down from above, as you wish, Eva, we are getting a divorce. I took the paper and examined it closely. Andrew leaned against the side, lighting a cigarette but not smoking it. He gave more than I had prepared for, perhaps the child born from our marriage made him feel some guilt. I picked up the pen to sign my name, but he spoke up. His gaze darkened as it fell on my abdomen. It's been 6 months, and to say to abort just like that, you can imagine how much it must hurt. I instinctively lowered my head. If it had a half-sibling from the same mother but a different father, it would seem too pitiful. Andrew scoffed dismissively, truly heartless. He released my hand, and I signed my name. Just as Andrew reached the door, he suddenly stopped and turned back. He took down the wedding photo hanging on the wall. The cruelty of laughter, I'm sorry, but my fiancée is very jealous during her pregnancy and has ordered me to get rid of this trash. You don't mind, do you? I calmly shook my head. There was nothing left in this house that I was attached to. As I was leaving in a taxi, Andrew stopped in front of me with Isabel. Eva, get lost, and don't ever show up in front of me again. After all, even if you kneel before me in the future, I won't meet a murderer. With that, he left in a cloud of dust. At that time, he didn't know that his words would come true. My taxi's destination was the airport, and that was our last meeting. In the following 3 years, I began to recuperate. I was healing both physically and mentally. I heard that Andrew had held another grand wedding for Isabel in the country. I just find it strange that the previous time in Ireland seemed to have happened without any waves. But I didn't pay much attention to it. My illness was treated conservatively, so over the past 3 years, I have traveled to many places, including Ireland. The freshness and beauty of everything made me realize that my past self had really lived poorly. Because I couldn't bear to part with the once surging love, I held on tightly even knowing the other person was leaving, letting my palms bleed and tear. For years, the wounds that scabbed and were worn away made me numb, until the true disaster of impending destruction finally arrived. As I gradually stopped forcing myself to let go, life began its true rebirth. I think time really is a good medicine. When my journey came to a halt, the doctor informed me that the final decision was a bone marrow transplant, and a match had been found. So, I returned to this city. I just didn't expect to see Andrew again so soon. Because I had to prepare for the surgery, I went to the hospital to complete the paperwork as soon as I got back. Just as I was leaving the hospital, I ran into Andrew. He was absent-mindedly leaning against the car, fiddling with a lighter between his fingers. Just as I was about to look away, he suddenly looked up, his gaze locking onto mine. He looked extremely surprised, standing up straight in a daze, and from a distance, I could even sense that he was trembling slightly. For some reason, he felt completely different, lacking the confidence and composure he usually had, replaced instead by a sense of fear and desolation. I didn't pay it any mind, wondering why he was here. He wanted to get closer, but the red light turned on, and my car had arrived. After that came that conversation. I thought he would give up after that day, but reality clearly proved otherwise. I looked helplessly at the man blocking my way. His voice was tense as he awkwardly spoke, "I know you don't want to see me, it will only take 2 minutes. The expert I mentioned last time is coming to City C, let him perform the surgery for you, and then I can rest easy." I sighed, there's no such thing as perfect timing in this world. "Andrew, I thought I made myself very clear to you." His voice was hoarse, clear, Eva. I tried to walk around him, but he reached out and grabbed me. "Just this once, I promise I will behave and disappear, not to disturb you again. I only ask you, don't joke about your health. The cost is too great, and I can't bear it again, Eva." "I don't understand this." Andrew was engulfed in a tremendous sorrow. He turned his head and forced out a smile that was uglier than crying. "Eva, my dad is gone, my mom hates me, and she won't see me anymore. I can't believe that so much has happened in just 3 years. When I left, their hair was still black." Liang's parents were most proud of their accomplished son. They loved their son, and because of that, they treated me, who was genuinely sincere to Andrew, kindly. After marriage, under Andrew's indifference, they protected me even more, treating me as if I were their own. How did a family that once loved each other end up in such a tragic separation? After the divorce, Andrew unilaterally severed all ties to our past. Fearing that the Liang family would make things difficult for me, I also stopped reaching out. Little did I expect that this farewell would be a final one. I lit a stick of incense in front of Andrew's father's grave. I thought my parents, who liked you so much, would be angry and disappointed to learn about your divorce and the abortion. But they only sighed and looked at me with sadness. They had never looked at me that way before, as if I had done something I would regret for a lifetime, even though they had believed in me during my most failed entrepreneurial moments. They said they feared this day the most and had seen it coming, feeling guilty for facing you. Andrew forced a smile. At that time, I didn't even tell them about Isabel. They didn't know I had made another woman pregnant. "Am I shameless, Eva?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I didn't understand then. Clearly, I was their son, so why did they still think so highly of you? Why did everyone believe it was I who would regret it? "I resent you, Eva. I resent your heartless miscarriage, resent how easily you left." I took a deep breath and went all out to plan the wedding, just to prove to everyone that your leaving me was a foolish mistake. It's me. Andrew choked, "wanting you to regret it, wanting you to come back." Under the setting sun, the man knelt before the grave, weeping uncontrollably. Leaving the cemetery, I encountered Isabel, who had come to find Andrew. She was holding the boy in her arms, so thin he looked like he was not even 2 years old. It was evident that she had not fared well over the years. Her white t-shirt and jeans were wrinkled. She looked bloated, her face showing signs of fatigue. Upon seeing me, her arms tightened as she rushed towards Andrew. In a deliberately raised voice, "Today, the baby keeps saying he wants daddy. Let's take him to the amusement park to play." Andrew's expression was blank as he glanced at the child. "Why take him out of the hospital? You don't know his condition?" The carefully constructed harmony was ruthlessly torn apart, and Isabel bit her lip, her face pale. "I understand now, I'm sorry." Isabel lowered her head, her eyes brimming with tears, enduring it all without looking at me. Andrew turned casually, "Eva, let me take you back." I shook my head, indicating that I had already called a car. "Eva." Knowing what he was about to say, I interrupted. "Andrew, thank you for finding the specialist, but I still choose to trust my doctor. I'm not being impulsive, my doctor is very skilled. I have seen her attitude towards patients, as well as the wall full of banners. But I will go see the specialist and ask him to look at my case." Upon hearing this, Andrew said no more and fell silent. As I was leaving by car, the child in Isabel's arms had just woken up. She was soothing him while softly asking, "Andrew, shall we go back too?" The child's cries were mixed with the woman's sobs. "You hold Vic, he's crying, he's your son." She broke down, "Andrew. She has already gone far away, how can you treat me like this? This was all your choice, you can leave, I won't keep you." That was the first time I saw that child. Little did I know, it would also be the last time I saw that child. It was shortly after my surgery was successful. The child ultimately left in the emergency room. From the very first time I met Isabel, I knew she truly loved Andrew. Those adoring eyes remained unchanged even 3 years later when we reunited. They were just filled with much more bitterness and fatigue. 3 years later, she ultimately became the very person she had once deemed the most unworthy 3 years ago. Andrew did not attend the child's funeral. 3 days later, when I returned home, I saw the man sitting dejectedly at the door. I called out uncertainly, "Andrew?" He looked dazed as if he had been drinking. After looking at me for a long time, he suddenly started to laugh. Before I could react, he embraced me tightly. His voice mixed with joy, "Eva, welcome back, I've been waiting for you." This sentence pulls me back to a distant past. That was our last happy time together. Starting a business is tough, always coming home late. But no matter when, we always left a light on for each other, waiting for him to return. "Welcome back, I'm still waiting for you." But how wonderful that time was, the later tearing apart was just as painful. I suddenly pushed Andrew away. "He hasn't woken up yet, what's wrong? Is Eva angry that I didn't go to the company to celebrate your birthday?" "I'm sorry, I promise I'll always be with you from now on. I bought your favorite cake, will you forgive me?" Strawberry-flavored cake was Eva's favorite flavor at 24. He was being cute and trying to please, just like he did in the beginning. "Andrew." His eyes curved, "Eva. My condolences." He was taken aback, first in confusion, until the cake smashed to the ground, and he suddenly realized, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He was very tired, the child's departure could not leave him untouched. After drinking, he felt dazed and wanted to escape, to get close to the warmest place hidden in his memories. But in the end, he still couldn't go back. During the day, I met Andrew's mother. She had lost weight, her hair was completely white, she had a certain grace but was no longer warm. Yet the moment she saw me, her kind smile made me realize I was wrong. She told me about the recent years. She said she felt relaxed and free abroad, and I told her I had been to many places without constraints. "Eva, I'm so happy to see you happy, Auntie." She was both comforted and sorrowful. "Our family has let you down." I shook my head, "It's all in the past." Later, at that wedding, Andrew actually kept his parents in the dark very well. But such a grand event ultimately couldn't be completely kept under wraps. They were congratulated by the neighbors for having a new daughter-in-law, and it had only been half a month since I left. The old couple was dizzy with shock and rushed to Andrew's home. But they only saw Isabel lying at home, flaunting her authority and giving orders. With a respectful mom and dad, she even deliberately supported her barely noticeable belly. It was only then that they understood why I had resolutely chosen to divorce and have an abortion, without even seeing them one last time. The old couple, who had been in love for half a lifetime, couldn't believe that their son would do such a thing. The cultured and gentle elder's eyes turned red as he shouted at Isabel. Isabel was also stunned. She went from appearing to taking her place in just 3 short months. With no effort at all, she made the original wife leave in disgrace. From beginning to end, she was held up and protected. How could she not be proud and pleased, and when has she ever suffered such humiliation? But what does it matter if everyone knows the truth? Who dares to point at her and call her shameless, lowly, a mistress? Until now. The people around her are all wealthy individuals of the same class, the circle she has been desperately trying to integrate into. But now, they are watching her joke, their whispers crawling over her like countless little bugs. She emotionally breaks down and retorts, "Why do you say such things about me? Andrew and I truly love each other and are together. Who do you think you are, to lecture me? You ignorant and futile people force him to be with someone he doesn't like, to have children he doesn't want with someone he doesn't love." She pointed at Andrew's dad and Andrew's mom. "You all, including Eva, are the ones who make him suffer. All his misfortunes and dissatisfaction are caused by you, it's all your fault. Only I can bring him happiness in this world, and only I can accompany him through this life, not you two old fossils who are half in the grave." Andrew's mom was left speechless with anger, while Andrew's dad clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. Isabel, however, did not notice and pushed past them to run outside. Andrew's dad had been so upset that he ended up in the hospital. Yet at that moment, Andrew seemed possessed. Silent and stubborn, he insisted on holding a wedding. No matter how they advised, how they tried to stop him, or how disappointed they were. On the day of the wedding, while Andrew's mom wasn't paying attention, Andrew's dad sneaked out of the hospital. On the way, he called Andrew and had a big argument with him over the phone. Andrew hung up in anger, directly handing the phone to Isabel to keep it out of sight and out of mind. Little did he know that this caused him to miss the last chance to save his father. Andrew's father had already arrived outside the wedding, but was suddenly struck by an illness due to his anger. Isabel, fearing that the hard-won wedding would be ruined, turned off her phone. When Andrew's mother discovered that Andrew's father's body was already cold, he was still holding his phone, with the last 4 calls being unanswered calls from Andrew. That day's wedding ultimately did not finish. Andrew's mother frantically tried to call Andrew, her nails filled with the flesh and blood of her own son. From that day on, she hated Andrew. On the same day, Andrew not only lost his father but also his mother. The death of loved ones will forever stand between those who are alive. Isabel also became one of the inescapable murderers. Andrew wouldn't say it, but she knew he hated her the most. The child in her womb was probably affected at that time. She was smart and ambitious, knowing it was time to leave. But she loved Andrew, and the young and fearless person at that time did not know that the torment was just beginning. Alone in the pain of pregnancy, suffering from a difficult birth and severe bleeding, the child was born with illness. At every stage, she thought there would never be a time she would regret more than this. But the immense silence drowned her. Late at night, when all was quiet, she asked herself how it had come to this, but the sound of the child's cries interrupted her once again. She didn't even have time to feel sad. The daily grind had worn away the once bright and beautiful person she used to be. She didn't want to think about why Andrew was unwilling to get a marriage certificate with her. Was it ultimately the death of Andrew's father, or was it that he never intended to marry her from the very beginning? After all, on the night of my birthday, she had an encounter with a drunken Andrew. She thought this was a huge step towards closing the distance between them. Little did she know that Andrew had given her a large sum of money, saying he had decided to return to family life. How could she accept this? She had given up her career to win this man's love. She truly loved this outstanding and upright man. If it weren't for the risks she took later, perhaps Andrew would never have seen her again. But seeing her again was merely to compensate her. She made a demand, asking him to accompany her for a month and do everything she requested. Her eyes were filled with tears. She knew Andrew had feelings for her, and she was even certain they were deep. His indulgence towards her also indicated this, allowing her to provoke me. Until that Irish wedding video was taken down from the entire internet. He lost his temper with her for the first time, waking her from her beautiful dream. Andrew suddenly demanded to end this journey early. But before leaving, she suddenly discovered she was pregnant. She knew her opportunity had come, this weapon was enough to fend me off. And indeed, she succeeded, lying at both ends in the hospital. Tell me that Andrew said he cared about her. Tell Andrew that I threatened her, I disdained giving birth to Andrew's child, and I aborted the baby, successfully provoking him. Andrew was really going to marry her, and she was so happy she couldn't find her way. She didn't even think about Andrew's gradually cooling attitude towards her. Later, she thought that if at any moment during this time she could have left, then today, she wouldn't have to watch Vic leave with her eyes wide open. She regretted it. The first time I heard news of Andrew after he left that night was in the social news. Isabel sold Andrew's company information to his rival company. Upon investigation, it was confirmed that Isabel was the one sent by the rival company to tempt Andrew from the very beginning. Isabel had all his information, allowing her to perfectly match with him. It was just that later she betrayed him, and now for some unknown reason, she suddenly turned against Andrew without any compensation. No one would know the reason. Because on the same day she took a large amount of sleeping pills, she was found collapsed in front of her son's small grave. Her posture resembled that of a mother holding her child. She was only 25 when she left, and such a young life has thus vanished. Perhaps it was because she had been out of the workforce for many years, even her betrayals were riddled with flaws. Andrew quickly stabilized the company. She risked everything, and that was all there was to it. I wonder if she would regret it. The days that followed were as plain as water, except for the occasional sight of cigarette butts in the corner. One summer night, it rained heavily, and I looked at the figure at the street corner, even wanting to urge him to go back. But after thinking it over, I ultimately drew the curtains. Adults must take responsibility for their own choices. Isabel betrayed her original company, so later on, apart from Andrew's company, she couldn't go anywhere else. Falling in love with a married man, she faced disapproval from Andrew's father, who later died from his own illness, yet others claimed it was her fault that Andrew's father died. She blamed herself for not allowing Vic to see his father until death, so she sought revenge, paying with her own life. Andrew was the same. 2 years later, Andrew's mother chose to leave. Her first half of life was filled with happiness, while the second half was full of torment. Andrew's apology messages always pulled her back, making her hate her son for exhausting all her strength. I saw that figure at Andrew's mother's funeral. He was stopped at the door by the bodyguards, the only one who was held back. She still refuses to forgive him to this day. I no longer had the position to comfort him. I simply placed the letter his mother left for him in the palm of his hand. Her feelings for Andrew were too complicated, she could never manage to hate him purely. And so, a middle-aged man cried like a small child. He knelt outside the door, continuously lamenting, feeling wronged, yet he could no longer wait for his mother's comfort. It was a long time later that I met Andrew again. He seemed to have recovered. Dressed in a suit, he was chatting animatedly with passers-by. When he saw me, he explained that he was here to thank me. His attitude was frank, as if he had truly come out of his shell. I felt no particular emotion, just a sense of relief. When we loved each other, we said too many sweet words. When I pleaded with him, I said too many harsh words. When we no longer loved, there was nothing left to say. So I also refused his gift of thanks. He paused slightly with his fingertips, then smiled and casually said okay. I thought life must go on, people have to move forward. 3 years after our parting, I met someone new and accepted his proposal. Yet, late at night, I received 2 messages. First rule, can you not leave me behind? Second rule, sorry, wrong person. I didn't think of Andrew. After all, he has been thriving these past 3 years, and we haven't seen each other in 3 years. Until not long after, I received Andrew's entire fortune. I held those property agreements, feeling a bit dazed. The memories are too heavy, he can't escape them. In front of Andrew's father and mother's grave, there is a new tombstone. I look at the tombstone, where Andrew smiles with a clean sunlight. I remember it was a snapshot of him taken from a group photo. At that time, we were still in college. His parents came to the school to see him and met me. Then we took a photo together.